This is really more of the tactical approach to how we do things. So you'll see some information in here. We'll pass out some handouts as well that really will speak to some of the tools that we use to get to some of the decision process that needs to be made, also prepare the organization for implementation of the ultimate solution that you're going to go into. But it's a very tried and true path. And ERP, as we've been talking about all the way along, has really evolved over the last decade or so. It's moved away from being a single software vendor type of delivery to everything that is involved in what we call the ecosystem surrounding your enterprise. So it's really evolved from ERP to digital enterprise operations. So Eric and I have done a video on the death of ERP. It got tons of views. I mean, lots of attention. But it really should be the death of ERP, long live EDO, so digital enterprise operations. If you see the core supply chain, finance, payroll, human capital, what we think of as ERP, that is always surrounded by other applications, CRM, asset management, on and on and on. All of those are interrelated, all of them are interconnected, and you have to be looking at the full picture, not just one single part of that. So traditional ERP implementations have always been very siloed, and so you get very disconnected processes, very disconnected people, and very often facilities all over the world that have been really conducting their own planning and execution of upgrades, of implementing new software solutions to take care of certain business requirements, but they haven't been united. And they haven't really been looking at improving process in the way that will forward the organization, that will bring value to the organization, right? So we have an equation for that. It's new software plus old processes equals expensive old processes, EOP. So if you look at that strategy, selection, phase 0 preparation of the organization, and program management along the way, that entire continuum, right? Then you really look at a different equation. New processes plus new technology equals digital enterprise operations. Digital transformation pillars that we look at in every organization that we come in contact with are all the same. It's going back to Eric's diagram with all of the arrows. This is tried and true. It's been the same way for the last 5 or 6 years. It's going to be the same way for the next decade. The transformation enablers, process, technical, people, and business drivers, right? These are the transformation layers that allow us to get to exactly what is the plan going forward, what does our journey map look like over the next 5, 10 years, that full-term horizon, and how do we get there? So looking at the current state, future state, developing your business imperatives along the way, and also assessing your risk and moving in that direction by selecting the right partners and then going into the implementation prepared as an organization to be successful in that. So mapping the transformation journey is really the first part. And again, this happens before you've selected a vendor. Or maybe you have a vendor that may be something that is kind of a leading choice. Or you may be looking at staying with your existing systems and processes and optimizing those existing systems and processes. Either case, you're going to have a map that's going to be showing how you start at the beginning, how you move all the way through that, and then you're going to be managing to where you are in that journey all the way along, and reporting that back to the key stakeholders in the organization, including your executive team. So all of this is a part of that preparation of the organization to move forward in a major undertaking. Most of the people we talk to are doing this for once in the next 20 years, right? Big decision, big imperatives along the way, but also a big return on that total investment. Part of that is understanding what your total cost of ownership is going to be. And very often, from a tactical standpoint, this is missed in the very beginning. People undertake a technology change for the sake of that technology change. They feel that processes are broken, that things are not working, and so they select a software vendor and they move forward into that stage one of digital transformation that we talked about. Unless you do a very deep dive total cost of ownership, understanding what your subscription costs are going to be, how you're going to be consolidating old systems and bringing them into the new system, how you're going to be managing change with your people, how you're going to be backfilling some of your core team members. You're going to want your best people working on your project team going forward. If that means hiring additional people or bringing in, managed services to support them in their roles, in their day jobs, then you have to do that in the background. You have to understand what that cost is going to be. So you have to understand your internal costs, your external costs, your chief financial officers and CEOs are going to want to know from an operational standpoint what it's going to cost me, from a capital expenditure standpoint what it's going to cost me. And so putting together this type of an artifact and doing a very deep dive on exactly what it will cost happens before you choose a software vendor partner or vendors in terms of a hybrid solution, because those can all be factored in later to really drill down to what the actual cost is going to be. But you have to, for your business case up front, understand exactly what this is going to look like going forward. So we were talking a little bit earlier about ROI. Two things. One is without the total cost of ownership or really a relative cost of ownership for any solution going forward, you can't establish what your return on investment is going to be. So that's kind of a misunderstanding that I think has been propagated on the market, again, by software vendors, because they tell you the best practices are going to produce this type of a return on our software. They call it value engineering internally, right? But they use industry standards that very often don't reflect what your business is going to go through in terms of this total cost. They don't reflect the internal costs for your teams to be dedicated to an implementation over the next couple of years. It doesn't take into account a lot of the factors that you saw in the TCO modeling. So that has to go into offsetting the formula here, where the return has got to be based on your actual numbers, what you expect to save in time, in effort, in the value of the data that you're able to get out of the systems in the implementation of a new software solution, right?
And so much of this helps with not only justifying the project too, but also defining what the business value is and helping provide some governance around the implementation. Because if we know where the business value is and what the expected business benefits are, it becomes a lot easier to make project governance decisions around, do we add that extra module? Do we customize the software? Do we do a third-party bolt-on? And make those game time decisions in the context of where's the business value. And if we can't deliver business value within that decision, then it's probably not the right decision to make. But if we can justify it with business value, then we can. So I think a lot of times organizations do a business case if they're lucky enough or if they're proactive enough to do one in the first place. Even those organizations will do a business case. They get the sell-in or the buy-in to sell the project, and they get the project approval, and then they sort of set the business case aside and then just start implementing without going back to it to sort of use it as a governance tool during the implementation. So there's a lot of short-term value that comes out of that in addition to that longer-term value as well.
Okay, the transformation readiness objectives, essentially, we've gone through this quite a bit, and the roadmap that you showed with the different chevrons was really talking about these primary pillars as well. But strategic and executive alignment, operational readiness, technical readiness, people readiness, and project governance are all of the things that we intuitively know have to be set up front, right? And again, I just keep pointing out that all of this happens before you choose a software vendor and before you choose a systems integrator. So this one is the people readiness, and since we're in London, I just I gravitate back to Ben-Hur and some of the old movies. I don't know why. But we keep you alive to serve this ship, roll well and live. That's the force down approach to the people in the organization. You're telling them, this is where we're going to go, and this is how we're going to get there. That's not the way that we approach these things, right? That's not effective change management. As well as looking at the benefits and the business case for going into a implementation process, you also have to look at the risks of what we've called here cliff diving into your digital transformation. That includes lack of a clear operational direction. System integrator takes control of your project. Again, we're talking about all these things that happen before your system integrator comes in. Once you choose a system integrator and a software system, when they come in, very often they'll tell you, this is the way that it ought to go, and this is what you ought to be doing. Very often not knowing anything about your business, not knowing anything about the planning that's gone on in the beginning. Decisions are being made while the meter is running on expensive consultants. Well, that's why up front you have to really prepare the organization for the implementation itself. Before the consultants, before the SI actually hits the ground and starts doing the implementation of the software system, right? Technology drives your business rather than the other way around. Most organizations that reach that stage one often make a technology choice and just go forward. Software vendor, systems integrator are often running with the implementation. Without this preparation, you have the risk of doing a technology shift, or lift and shift as we used to call it, without actually getting any of the benefits that you're setting out to achieve with your business planning and with aligning the organization on the go forward. Too much time and money spent on the project. This is the real main failure point for most implementations. I think you would agree, Eric, is when an implementation runs overly long, the only ones that benefit are the systems integrator that's putting consultants on the job and the software vendor, because the software vendor doesn't have anything to lose with a long implementation term, right? So we need to make this as efficient as possible. Otherwise, projects are considered failures if they run way over budget, which equals way over time. Same thing. Project team employee and executive frustration. No project is linear. If you end up without the upfront preparation, for instance, data cleansing, if you don't have the data cleansing, you have to back up, you have to do some of these things to get the project back on track. You end up with huge fatigue in the organization. We're working on a 5-year-long implementation right now that we were asked to come back in and rescue. Our remediation has taken 6 months. We've got it back on track for a go-live after 5 years in 3 months hence. And that required just getting everybody back on board with everything that we're talking about from a change management and a project involvement standpoint, and also backfilling some of the resources with other people so that they could spend the time required on the project. All of this staffing, the change management aspect, everything going back into the go-forward strategy for the implementation and beginning with your systems integrators and the software vendors at phase 1 is what we call phase 0. The partner first approach really is just all about choosing that software vendor or vendors. There may be many vendors in that ecosystem that we talked about. Also a few systems integrators. In many cases, there will be certified people that will be installing or implementing some aspects of the solution. For instance, a CRM that's different from an ERP system. You may have a different systems integrator or wrench turner working on the CRM implementation at the same time that you're implementing core ERP over the rest of the organization. Managing all of those different pieces is really putting the client or the customer at the center and having everyone work in concert all the way through. We refer to this as a competency matrix. So bringing the right people together, I've been saying this all the way through the presentation. Everything that we've been talking about, including organizational preparedness, happens before you have your systems integrator and your software vendor chosen. Generally, you'll pick the software vendor before you pick the systems integrator that's going to be implementing the solution, right? So all of that upfront piece is what we term advisory. So, or it's internal to the organization itself. And if the internal organization has the wherewithal to have a program management office, to have leadership, as Logan's company does, that really understands exactly what needs to be done up front, then you can get through this strategy and selection at the very beginning, entering into phase 0, understanding exactly who your software vendor of choice is going to be. Again, putting together the data migration plan that is going to be according to exactly which software vendor you're going to be implementing as your primary solution. Phase 0 is really critically important to getting a good launch on the implementation itself. And again, not again, but for the first time, the competencies here, the software vendor absolutely knows the software. They absolutely know how to troubleshoot all the cloud environments. They know the integration between their cloud solution and other cloud solutions, on-premise solutions, and so forth. So the interoperability piece, they can manage very well, and they have to manage very well. The technical implementation team really knows the software. They know the design, build, the upfront work that goes into the implementation itself. The phase 1 core competency belongs to the systems integrators, the technical teams. The platform providers, AWS, Azure, the software vendors themselves, Oracle, they have their own cloud system. They absolutely know how everything works from provisioning all the way through go live and support of the applications on their cloud system. But they don't know anything about the upfront piece, about your transformational goals. They don't know anything about the business planning that goes up front. They can't accomplish any of that for you. So what we try to bring together as a part of our mission control idea is all of these competencies into all phases of the project, all the way through, including support after go live. That's one of the things that people don't think about very much. We talked a little bit about user adoption. User adoption and support post go live, because your implementation technical team is going to roll off, right? They're gone. And now you're left to support this on your own. That's got to be figured out up front. That's all a part of phase 0. For instance, Oracle will do a lot of their own implementation. SAP does a lot of their own implementation. Infor almost always works with partners. I say almost because the LN and some of their CIS modules, they do themselves. And by the way, the software vendors don't do a very good job of professional services. So they like to capture that revenue, but they know nothing about organizational change, for instance. They know very little about training. They know very little about this upfront piece. They're not going to be your partner in the very beginning, putting together the business planning, putting together the strategy for the organization going forward. They're not going to be a part of your long-term roadmap, because as soon as you're done and you've signed your product order form and you're moving along with the software vendor, they're pretty much happy to be in the background just saying, hey, how's it going? You know, anything that we can do for you? Any solution that we can provide? Because what you really need is more software. More software will fix your problem. So that's, I get a little too critical of software vendors. They're actually, they're wanting to do the right thing. They're just very sales driven. So that's where some of the bad behavior comes from. NetSuite, Workday, I would say to some degree, SAP, do have their own self-governing quality assurance. The problem is the self-governing part. It is a little bit like the fox in the hen house. in terms of if you do run into a problem, they're going to fix it internally before they say, you know, our project manager in this case is not doing a good job. They're going to do everything that they can to keep that project manager in place. So they do provide that quality assurance piece, but it's a little bit disingenuous. This is a big list, and we're not going to get through it today. But it is an artifact that you all can use, that we all have vetted over many, many implementations, many client engagements. And essentially, it's setting up for success that is not guaranteed. If you go through each of these steps and you check each of these boxes along the way, there are like 2 more pages, and then we'll get to the end. We just don't have enough time to go through it. It's everything that we've been talking about today. And there is more detail even underneath these bullets, but I can guarantee you that if you don't go through a checklist like this, you have a very good chance of failure. So can't guarantee success, but I can guarantee failure if you don't do at least 90% of what we're talking about here. And this was just a statement that everyone should invest time determining exactly who their partners are going to be, both from the software vendor to the systems integrators to an advisory, if that's appropriate. And that's one of the keys to success as well. So if you look at the heat map, we've been talking about the organizational readiness assessment. The heat map identifies each of the departments in this particular organization that were issued a questionnaire. The questions are across the top. They go from, you know, do you have confidence in our leadership team to chart a good direction? There are questions that you can read through and see that fine print, if you can do that. But it provides a heat map that we can look at and say, these departments and this level of individuals, some of it is based on tenure, some of it's based on level of seniority in the organization, their position in the organization, whether they're, you know, a VP, they're in sales, they're somebody who's just working on the shipping and receiving dock. And we determine exactly where the resistance to change is going to come, where they're not fully on board with the program going forward. And we're able to make changes in those departments, in those areas, with those individuals that are resistant to that change. And those recommendations came on the back of this. So the heat map charts out how everyone is doing in the organization, and the backside of it are the recommendations that came from those findings. So this is a process and a methodology that we pursue as proprietary, but it's not a secret. It's just a great way of managing the organization from an overall standpoint. So the question came up earlier, you know, how do you go about this organizational readiness assessment? This is the practical part of that. The processes, we keep talking about processes need to be changed, otherwise you end up with that equation that I was talking about. New software plus old processes equals expensive old processes. There are a couple of firms out there that do a really good job of visualizing how these processes are mapped. So it's generally a Visio diagram type of a thing, but Celonis, Mavim, there are a number of partners that we've worked with in the past that do this through machine learning and AI to provide the map of these processes. And essentially it's taking the lowest performing practice within, for instance, procurement, issuing a PO. So you follow along with the process of issuing that PO. You've got one clerk who basically has the lowest performing level, and that's charted as kind of a low performance. The highest performing level is charted as a high performance. And what you really want to get is you want to have a middle level performance so that everyone reaches a standard or achieves a standard of performance in that given work stream, right? And when we map that out and chart it like this, it becomes very visible in terms of what we need to do to affect change. And this is an incredible process. So when we talk about process mapping, this is really what we're trying to identify. Now we're using some technology instead of standing with a stopwatch, seeing how long it takes for somebody to do something. It used to be called time and motion studies. So some of you that have been around as long as I have remember people standing with a stopwatch in manufacturing operations. This does that automatically, and it's an incredible tool.
So take some of the subjectivity out of discussions around current state business processes and future state to some degree, but primarily focusing on what all the variations are in your current processes and how long the processes are actually taking. A lot of times when you talk about it in a workshop setting like this, you map it out on a whiteboard, but then you have the data that actually shows what's actually happening. A lot of times it's very different pictures that are painted when you use actual data from the systems and technology that mines the actual processes compared to what people think is happening. It also helps you identify all the exceptions, and all the variations, exceptions, and bottlenecks within a process.
It also gives you training guidelines. So in order to improve processes, in many cases, you don't have to change the underlying technology. In many cases, we identify things like this. Logan, when we were in that workshop, we were identifying all sorts of things that people were going, wow, we could change that tomorrow. We don't need to change systems. We need to do things better. So anyway, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.